My mother, Nancy, smiled confidently from the podium. She called my name, Olivia, over the microphone and offered me an honorary position in her foundation to publicly bind me. It was a master class in manipulation, delivered to a ballroom of 240 wealthy donors. My Uncle Robert beamed from the front row, nodding at her manufactured grace. Nobody saw the trap. They just saw a generous woman saving her troubled daughter. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just walked up the velvet steps, carrying a single, heavy folder. That folder didn't hold an acceptance speech. It held the end of her entire empire. Have you ever had to sit quietly while someone rewrote your reality? Share your story in the comments. And tell me where you're listening from. But to understand how a daughter becomes an eviction notice, we have to go back. 3 years before that night, I was standing in ankle-deep sewage. The smell of rust and rot filled my small apartment. A main line had backed up through the plumbing, turning my living room into a dark, freezing swamp. I waded toward the floating coffee table. My hands were shaking from the cold. I reached into the gray water and pulled out a silver picture frame. Mud coated the glass. I wiped the sludge away with my thumb to reveal a photo of Nancy, Uncle Robert, and me from a Thanksgiving dinner. In the picture, Nancy had her hand resting firmly on my shoulder. I managed commercial properties for a living. I looked at the ruined baseboards and knew exactly what this water damage meant. It meant tearing out the drywall. It meant finding a hotel for at least a month. It meant thousands of dollars I did not have in my checking account. I picked up my phone. The battery showed 4%. I dialed Nancy's number. For 8 years, I had transferred $1,400 on the first of every month to keep her struggling consulting firm afloat. She always called it a temporary bridge loan. Funny how temporary help becomes a permanent obligation. I did the math while the phone rang. I had handed over more than $130,000. I just needed a 1-month pause. I needed to skip one single transfer so I wouldn't end up sleeping in my car. She picked up on the 4th ring. Background noise echoed through the speaker. Clinking glasses. Laughter. She was at a restaurant. I'm in the middle of a lunch meeting. Nancy said, "Make it fast." My apartment flooded. I said. My voice echoed in the empty vet room. The plumbing backed up. I have to evacuate. I need to pause the transfer for this month to pay the restoration crew. Silence stretched on the line. The laughter in her background continued. "We can't pause the mortgage just because you have water on the floor," she said. Not a question about where I would sleep. Not a question about whether I was safe. Just a cold, flat defense of her cash flow. "I don't have the money to fix this and pay you," I said softly. "You are a property manager. Figure it out without inconveniencing your family." Nancy replied, "I have investors to entertain. Do not miss the first of the month." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The screen flickered and went black. I stood alone in the freezing water. The silver picture frame was still in my left hand. For 8 years, I had paid a premium for a family that treated me like a cash machine instead of a daughter. I opened my fingers. The frame dropped back into the sewage with a dull splash. It was time to close the account. My name is Olivia Hayes. I am 32 years old. I manage commercial real estate, which means my entire professional life is built on assessing risk, enforcing contracts, and knowing exactly when to cut a loss. For 8 years, I ignored every single one of those principles when it came to Nancy. I had funneled over $130,000 into her failing business. That money was my down payment for a house. It was my emergency fund. It was my safety net. Traded away for the illusion that she might one day act like a mother instead of a debt collector. Standing in that freezing, flooded apartment, the illusion finally broke. I did not call her back. I walked to the only dry corner of my bedroom and sat on my mattress. I opened my banking app. The screen glowed in the dark room. There it was. The recurring scheduled transfer for the first of the month. $1,400. I tapped the settings icon. I hit delete. The app asked for confirmation. I tapped yes. The screen refreshed. The pipeline was closed. I spent the next 48 hours acting like a property manager dealing with a toxic asset. I broke my lease. I paid the penalty fee using the exact money I had just stopped from going to Nancy. I packed my clothes, my files, and my laptop into my car. I left the ruined furniture behind. I drove 300 miles east and did not look in the rearview mirror. When the first of the month arrived, Nancy's account came up short. The phone calls started at 8 in the morning. Nancy called 4 times. I let every single one go to voicemail. By noon, she realized the money wasn't just delayed. It was gone. She didn't come looking for me to see if I was safe. She went to work on my reputation. Within a week, Nancy spun a masterpiece of a story through the local business community. She told her investors and her board that the stress of my job had caused a severe psychological breakdown. She said I had become erratic, cut off my loving family, and vanished. Uncle Robert, who sat on her board and had known me my entire life, bought the lie immediately. He sent me exactly one text message on a Tuesday morning. "Your mother is terrified. Do not contact me until you seek psychiatric help." When I tried to reply with a picture of the flooded apartment, the message turned green. He had blocked my number. I sat in a quiet coffee shop in my new city, looking at that green text bubble. I had kept my paycheck for the first time in nearly a decade. The cost was every tie to my hometown and the only uncle I had left. Nancy would undoubtedly use her new victim status to hunt for fresh sympathy. And eventually, she would need to find me to see if my pockets were full again. I put my phone face down on the table. She could look all she wanted. The bank was permanently closed. 3 years passed. 36 months without a single automatic transfer leaving my checking account. I became the senior property manager of a 12-story commercial complex in a new city. The work was demanding, but the silence at the end of the day was entirely mine. Nancy did not enjoy the silence. She turned my absence into a corporate asset. Word eventually trickled back to me through old industry connections. Nancy was thriving. She regularly hosted donor galas for her business association. Using the tragedy of a daughter who had suffered a severe psychological break to secure grants and sympathy funding, she played the surviving victim flawlessly. But victims always need more funding. And eventually, Nancy needed to know if my pockets had refilled. It happened on a Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon. I was standing in the security control room on the second floor, auditing the camera feeds with Marcus, the shift supervisor. The wall of monitors displayed every angle of the building. My eyes caught movement on monitor 4. The main lobby. A woman in a gray trench coat stood near the reception desk. She kept her head down, her thumb rapidly typing on her phone screen. She looked up, asked the receptionist a question, and immediately went back to typing. It was Jessica Palmer, Nancy's executive assistant. "Marcus," I said, pointing at the glass. "The woman at the front desk. Is she a registered vendor?" Marcus checked his log. "No." "Walk in." She asked the receptionist if an Olivia Hayes was still the manager here. Said she was an old colleague trying to send a gift. Down in the lobby, Jessica's phone pinged. She typed another rapid response. Nancy was on the other end of that screen, pulling the strings from 300 miles away, trying to exert control over a life she no longer had access to. I reached for the security radio on the console. I wanted to send 2 guards down to the marble lobby and escort her directly to the curb. My hand hovered over the transmit button. Then I stepped back. The building charter was explicitly clear. The ground floor was zoned as a public commercial atrium, unless a visitor raised their voice. harassed a tenant, or caused a physical disturbance. Forcibly removing them violated our lease agreements. If I used my management authority to throw a quiet woman out for personal reasons, the receptionist was required to file an incident report. That report would go straight to my regional directors. I had spent 3 years building a flawless record. I could not risk a formal reprimand over Nancy's surveillance tactics. I watched Monitor 4. Jessica's phone screen lit up again. She leaned closer to the desk, smiling, pressing for my exact floor and office number. If she went back to Nancy and reported that I was hiding behind security cameras, it would only validate the lie that I was erratic and unstable. The inspection would never stop. I smoothed the front of my jacket. If the building rules said I couldn't throw her out, I would just have to go down there and buy her a cup of coffee. I took the south elevator down to the ground floor. The lobby was loud, filled with midday foot traffic. I walked up behind Jessica while she was typing another update to her boss. "Hello?" "Jessica," I said. She jumped, nearly dropping her phone on the marble floor. She spun around. Her face lost its color. "Olivia." "Hi. I was just in the area for a conference." "There are no conferences in this building on Tuesdays," I said. I pointed to the cafe across the atrium. "Let's get coffee." My treat. I didn't leave room for a no. I walked toward the cafe. She followed me like a reprimanded employee. We sat at a small round table near the window. I ordered a black coffee. Jessica tore open 3 sugar packets and spilled half the granules on the wood surface. Her hands were trembling. She had always been a nervous assistant. But this was different. This was sheer panic. I didn't ask why she was spying on me. I didn't ask what Nancy had told her to find. I just watched her. Silence makes people deeply uncomfortable. When you manage commercial leases, you learn that whoever breaks a silence usually gives away their leverage. Jessica broke first. "She's going to ruin me." "Olivia." It was not the angle I expected. Nancy doesn't ruin people who know her passwords. I said. "She made me sign as the primary guarantor on the new association accounts." Jessica whispered. She rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. "If the yearly audit fails, my name is on the legal filings, not hers." She said it was just a standard administrative procedure, but the liability is all mine. She looked down at her paper cup. "I shouldn't have stayed. I knew she made up that story about your psychiatric break. We all knew. The whole office." Jessica swallowed hard. "But she pays 20% over market rate. We just kept our heads down." I looked at the woman sitting across from me. A whole office of adults knew I was completely sane. And they let a mother destroy her daughter's reputation for a 20% bump in salary. That is how complicity operates. It is rarely a grand conspiracy. It is usually just quiet people protecting their paychecks. Jessica reached for a napkin to wipe up the spilled sugar. Her elbow clipped her overstuffed leather folder. It slid off the edge of the table and hit the floor. Papers scattered across the tile. I knelt to help her gather them. I reached for a thick stack of documents. The cover page read, "Small Business Hardship Relief Fund." But the paper stapled directly underneath it was not a business expense. It was a glossy, pink receipt from a luxury jeweler in my hometown. It itemized a $4,200 diamond tennis bracelet. The purchase date was exactly 8 days ago. I held the paper for 3 seconds. My mother was not just using my name for sympathy. She was using it to run a massive financial fraud. The local business community was not blindly taking her side against me. They were being robbed blind. "Thank you," Jessica said, snatching the stack of papers back. She shoved them into her bag and stood up quickly. "I really have to get back. Drive safe." "Jessica," I said. I stayed at the table while she hurried out the glass doors. I finally had my answer. Now I just needed a venue. I returned to my apartment and pulled a heavy cardboard storage box from the top shelf of my bedroom closet. I carried it into the living room and dumped the contents onto the hardwood floor. Hundreds of paper bank statements spilled across the rug. For 8 years, I had transferred $1,400 on the first of every month. I sat on the floor with a yellow highlighter and a black pen. I lined up my personal bank records next to the timeline of the financial reports I had seen in Jessica's folder. I didn't need a degree to see the pattern. The math was elementary, and the arrogance was staggering. Nancy had been collecting donations for her business association's hardship fund for years, but instead of letting that money sit in the accounts for local businesses, she spent it on luxury dinners, private flights, and $4,000 diamond bracelets. To pass the annual board audits, she needed the account balances to look completely untouched. That was where I came in. My monthly transfers weren't keeping the lights on at a struggling consulting firm. They were quietly replacing the charity funds she was draining. I had postponed vacations. I had lived in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling. Every time she called crying about a missed utility bill, I had sent my emergency savings. I had funded her fraud. I stacked the papers. 8 years. 96 transfers. Over $130,000 in total. I punched 3 holes through the side of the stack and bound it together in a thick, black leather folder. It was no longer a record of my blind loyalty. It was a loaded weapon. The association's annual donor gala was scheduled for that Saturday night at the Heritage Club, a private venue back in my hometown. I drove the 300 miles in absolute silence. The radio stayed off. I watched the highway markers count down the distance to the city I had fled. I crossed the county line just as the sun set. The familiar exit signs looked different to me now. They didn't look like home. They looked like a crime scene. I parked 3 blocks away from the venue to avoid the valet line. The evening air was cold, smelling of exhaust and incoming rain. I walked up the wide stone steps of the Heritage Club. The front entrance was flanked by 2 private security guards in dark suits. They held electronic tablets, scanning guests as arriving. I stepped up to the podium. "Good evening," the taller guard said. "Name for the guest list, Olivia Hayes." I said. He tapped the screen. He scrolled down, then back up. His expression hardened. "I'm sorry. Ma'am, you aren't on the approved list. This is a closed corporate event. Only active board members and registered donors. Check under the executive committee," I said. He didn't even look down. If you don't have a digital invitation on your phone, you have to step away from the doors. This was the perimeter Nancy had built, a digital wall designed to keep unpredictable elements out. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or demand to speak to a manager. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked back down the stone steps. I walked around the perimeter of the brick building until I found the loading dock. Managing commercial properties meant I knew exactly how venues operated behind the scenes. There is always a service corridor. A young catering manager in a white apron stood by a propped-open metal door. He was smoking a cigarette and scrolling on his phone. I adjusted my dark blazer and walked straight toward the entrance with my head up. "Hey," he said, stepping into the doorway to block my path. "Kitchen staff and vendors only. Event guests have to use the front." "I'm not a guest," I said. I held up the thick black folder, tapping the leather cover with my index finger. "I'm the regional venue coordinator. The event sponsor needs these audit files at the main podium before the keynote speech starts in 5 minutes. If I don't get this to the stage, the executive director is going to come back here and ask both of us why." He looked at my suit, then at the heavy folder. He took a drag of his cigarette and stepped aside. "Second door on the left takes you past the kitchen," he said. "Thank you," I replied. I walked past him into the fluorescent lighting of the service hallway. If a club manager stopped me and asked for a vendor badge, I would be arrested for criminal trespassing. I would spend the night in a county jail cell. That was the price of bypassing the front door. I navigated the concrete halls. The smell of roasted chicken and industrial cleaning fluid hung heavy in the air. I passed a line of waiters carrying silver trays and stopped right behind the heavy mahogany double doors of the main ballroom. Through the thick wood, I heard the sharp whine of microphone feedback, followed by polite applause. I held the cold leather folder against my side. The keynote was starting. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors. The ballroom was completely silent except for my mother's voice echoing through the sound system. 240 guests sat at round tables. Watching her, Nancy stood behind an acrylic podium. She wore a tailored navy suit. When I started walking down the center aisle, her eyes locked onto me. She did not freeze. She did not panic. She pivoted. Nancy smiled confidently from the podium. She called my name, Olivia, over the microphone, and offered me an honorary position in her foundation to publicly bind me. My daughter, Olivia, has returned to us after a very long, difficult battle with her mental health, Nancy said. The crowd murmured with sympathetic approval. We are establishing a new chair on the committee in her name. A security guard in a dark suit stepped into the aisle. He reached out to grab my arm and pull me toward the exit. In the front row, Uncle Robert stood up. He held his hand up, signaling the guard to stop. He looked at me, then at the heavy black folder in my hands. He wanted to know why I had breached a private event. The guard stepped back. I walked up the velvet steps. I did not yell. I did not defend my sanity. I stood next to Nancy and dropped the thick leather folder onto the podium. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. 8 years, I said. I did not need the microphone. The room was quiet enough. 96 automatic transfers. Over $130,000. Nancy reached for the microphone to cut me off. But another voice echoed through the ballroom first. And a $4,200 diamond bracelet. Expense to the hardship fund last Tuesday. Jessica Palmer stepped out from the side of the stage. She held her cell phone high in her right hand. The screen was lit. Nancy's confident smile vanished. This is an email sent from Nancy Hayes to my private account yesterday morning, Jessica said clearly. She read directly from the screen. Check if Olivia has built up her savings yet. If her credit is good, we can use her as a guarantor for the new association credit line. Keep the board out of this. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't sympathy anymore. It was recognition. Nancy's hands began to shake. The microphone slipped from her fingers and hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, sharp shriek of feedback. She stumbled backward away from the noise. Her shoulder caught the edge of the acrylic document stand. It tipped over, sending her typed speech scattering across the stage. She gripped the edge of the back curtain. Her chest heaved. She gasped for air, unable to form a single word. Uncle Robert walked up the steps. He did not look at his sister. He picked up the black folder, opened it, and read the first 3 pages of my bank statements. He looked at the dates, then at the amounts. He closed the folder. He looked at Nancy, trembling against the curtain. He walked off the stage. The trap was broken. The local business association did not wait for the weekend to pass. By midnight, every major donor had withdrawn their pledges. Nancy was formally stripped of her board seat before the catering staff had finished clearing the ballroom tables. Her foundation accounts were frozen, pending a full forensic audit. She tried to call an emergency meeting in the lobby, but the executives she had schmoozed for years simply walked past her to the valet stand. Uncle Robert did not escape the blast radius. He had personally vouched for her character and co-signed 2 years of her operating budgets. On Monday morning, the Ethics Committee opened an investigation into his own corporate holdings. He had spent his entire life building a pristine reputation in that town, leveraging his good name to secure those donor funds. It evaporated in a single evening. His own partners asked him to step down. I did not stick around to watch them pack up their offices. I drove the 300 miles back to my city in the dark. The rain started just as I crossed the county line, washing the highway clean. I parked in my assigned spot, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and unlocked my door. I flipped the light switch. The apartment was completely silent. I walked into the kitchen and filled the kettle. While the water heated, I took a damp cloth and began wiping down the baseboards and the hallway walls. The paint was smooth and bare. There were no hooks. There were no nails. There were no silver picture frames. The storage box from my flooded apartment was sitting in the corner of the bedroom. I picked it up. I carried it down the hall, out the side door, and over to the industrial dumpster in the alley. I did not open the flaps to look at the Thanksgiving photo one last time. I did not dig through the damp cardboard for a memory to save. I lifted the heavy plastic lid and threw the entire box inside. I went back upstairs. The kettle whistled. I poured a cup of tea, walked into the living room, and sat on the sofa. I looked at the empty white walls. The space was cold, and it would always be a little too quiet, but it belonged entirely to me. When your family treats you like a business asset, eviction is the only form of self-respect. I know exactly what you were screaming at your screen right now. You were yelling, "Olivia, why did you keep paying them? Why did you wait 8 years and send over $100,000 to a mother who didn't even care if you had a dry place to sleep?" It is so easy to judge from the outside. But Olivia wasn't stupid. She was trapped in the slot machine effect. In a toxic family environment, love is rarely given freely. It's dispensed exactly like a rigged casino game. You put in your coins, your money, your time, your peace of mind, and most of the time, you get absolutely nothing in return. But every once in a while, they give you a tiny crumb, a fake compliment, a Thanksgiving dinner where nobody yells. That random, unpredictable payout wires your brain to keep pulling the lever, hoping the next time will be the big jackpot where they finally love you for real. Olivia kept paying because she was buying hope. But when the water rose in her apartment, she woke up. And I want to point out 2 brilliant, practical moves Olivia made that you can use to protect yourself. Let's call the first one the silent freeze. She didn't call Nancy to argue. She didn't threaten to cut her off. She just logged into her banking app and deleted the transfer. Arguing gives a manipulator a chance to twist your words and play the victim. Silence just cuts off their oxygen. Let's call the second move the paper trail. Olivia didn't go to that gala to scream about how bad her mother was. She brought 96 bank statements. You cannot gaslight a bank statement. She used cold, hard data to completely dismantle a public lie. Sometimes, walking away leaves a permanent, empty space in your life, just like Olivia's bare walls. But an empty wall is infinitely better than a wall hanging a picture of someone who only uses you. You are a person, not a retirement plan. Have you ever had to cut off someone who only saw you as a resource? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. If this episode helped you see your own worth today, hit subscribe and share it with a friend who needs to hear this.